haven't yet met yet, my name is Moriah. I'm one of the staff members here. It's very good to see you all this morning. Today we're going to be continuing in our series on rest. And we'll be looking at the first passage that we read in Matthew 11. Now, as I was thinking and reading about this passage, I was reminded about one of my professors in university, and he used to talk about something that he called being dangerously tired. And you can think about what that means when we know this about. So he would talk about being dangerously tired. It was one of his things that he kept mentioning to us. And what he meant by that would be times or periods where you're just jumping from thing to thing. You have to-do list after to-do list, and just keep on going and never stopping until suddenly you realize that you've been running for so long. You've been trying to juggle all the burdens and situations in life that even though you might physically be fine, you find that yet still the depths of your soul are somehow exhausted and broken. I imagine being dangerously tired is not an experience unique to my former professor. I imagine it's an experience that's not unique to all, but something that sounds all too familiar to all too many people, if not in your own life personally, then perhaps in the life of someone that you know. And so we're going to explore a bit into Matthew 11, the promise and the hope that there is given to those who might resonate with this category of being dangerously tired. This is an absolutely beautiful passage, and I find many times for me it's given me a lot of comfort. And just to put it in a bit of context, if you read throughout the entire chapter, we have John's disciples coming to Jesus. They're posing him a question, are you the person that we think you are? And Jesus in return tells them, just look around. See what's happening. See all the signs. He goes on further to condemn those who don't recognize what God is doing, both through John's ministry and through his own ministry. And he denounces those who have not repented, who have not noticed, hey, something new is going on here, something different. And then he turns and he starts praying to the Father. And this is where we pick the narrative back up. In his prayer, Jesus thanks God for having hidden this revelation from the wise and the learned and revealing it instead to children. Now, on a first glance, it might seem a bit odd. Why would God hide good news from someone? But let's think about this a little bit further. As we just heard throughout this chapter, we hear examples of those who aren't noticing what's going on, who don't see the signs, or who don't believe them. Yet within that, there's still a few people who do believe. The truth, the revelation of Jesus is here, but it is hidden from the crowd, from those who already think they have everything understood, who already have figured God out. They are unable to see, and as Jesus mentioned earlier, the one who has ears to hear, let him hear. Rather, the truth now is now visible to the humble. Knowledge about who God is, who Jesus is, his authority as God's Son, and this new work that God is doing is not about being intelligent enough to understand, but it's about being humble enough to be part of this new kind of work, this new kind of relationship that is happening here. And so they are described as children. To take it one step further, this revelation to children or to the humble also shows that there's a huge inclusivity to God's work. It's not something that is for the social elite, something totally exclusive for professors, religious leaders, politicians, people who are at the top of the societal food chain. Rather, it is available to everyone and anyone who will humble themselves and come to God like a child. And in this, God is pleased. Jesus goes on to speak about the relationship between him and the Father, and between the Father and the Son and humanity. Jesus tells about the authority that's been given to him by the Father, and we get a little bit of insight into this intimate relationship that exists there. By seeing Jesus and encountering Jesus, one has also encountered God himself. And just as the Son and the Father have this unique and close relationship, we can also have this relationship with God through Jesus. And so there's this little bit of this progression that we start to see. The revelation of Jesus to the humble, and then just as the Father and the Son have a close and personal relationship, the humble can also have the same relationship with God. So we have Jesus' prayer of thanks, that God has revealed himself, and then we have this wonderful insight that we can also encounter God. Now from verse 28, we have the tone which switches a bit. We had prayer, we had some bit of explanation, and now Jesus starts addressing those who are listening very directly. Come to me. Come to me, all the ones among you who are weary, who are burdened, and I will give you rest. It's a promise, and it's a beautiful one. In the world of ancient Israel, where there is Roman occupation and control, there is burden of legalism by religious leaders, there's debts, taxes, diseases, and so much more. There is a promise of rest, of relief to those who will come to God. And we're not talking about physical rest for the body, as important as that is, but we're talking here about rest for the soul. Relief from being dangerously tired. And if you remember to the second passage that we read in Matthew 12, we see one of the many examples about how Jesus and the Jewish leaders clashed. The religious expectations and legalism placed on people were enormous. And as that passage that we read shows, and also what Jesus goes on to talk about in Matthew 23, there was also a lot of hypocrisy among the religious leaders that were very willing to put unnecessary burdens on people, but were not willing to lift a finger to help them. Jesus contrasts this and shows his own leadership and offers rest to those who are weary and burdened, to those who have heavy things that they've taken up upon themselves, and also to those who have had heavy things placed upon them. Now, if you've been with us since January, or if you looked at the slides on the screen with the announcements going by earlier, you may have noticed one verse. It's also at the top of the newsletter. There's a verse from Jeremiah that is constantly floating around the church. Jeremiah 6:16. This is what the Lord says: stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is and walk in it, and you will find rest for your souls. This was sort of a theme verse throughout our year, but it's also a verse that Jesus ended up quoting directly in this passage. You will find rest for your souls. God had promised before that there's a path, there's a good way, walk in it, and now this past promise can find its fulfillment in Jesus himself as the one who will give us final rest, true rest, to all those who will come, follow him, take up his yoke, and learn from him. But the yoke that Jesus asks us to take up is not just any yoke, but it's one that he promises is easy and a burden that is light. Now, just to clarify terminology, a yoke is oftentimes you think of a wooden cross piece that goes, usually I see a lot of time with animals, that goes over the necks, attaches them together, and often to something else behind, like a plow or a wagon. In this time frame that we're talking about, teachers of the law would also talk about the yoke of the Torah, or the yoke of the law, the thing that we take up. But the yoke that Jesus invites us to take part of is not one that weighs heavy, it's not one that crushes its bearers, but is one that is good. Now, the word that we read here as easy carries with it also the connotation of something being good, something being kind, useful, and no It's something that we take up of our own initiative. It's not forced on us. We choose to take off. And it's this sort of trade-off. We give up this heavy yoke that we be carrying with all the hardships, expectations, and struggles. And we trade it for what Jesus offers that is good and is light. And it's tricky sometimes when we talk about burdens and we think about it, because, at least for me, when I think about it, I think of something that is big, something that's heavy, something generally unpleasant, something that, no please, thank you, I'm good, I have enough of that. But we're still talking about what Jesus asks us to pick up, and it's something different. It's not a total escape from reality or responsibility or from the complexities of life. It's not escapist ideology, but there is this sense of relief of whatever it may be that is on our shoulders. Jesus is having something better for us. To all those exhausted by life, Jesus is offering us something better, something good. So I have a question. How are you doing today? And not how are you doing in the sense of some pre-programmed greetings. Hi, how are you? I'm fine, good. How are you actually doing? In all openness and all honesty. Because life, amidst all its joys and wonders, can also very much have its curveballs, its hardships and challenges that can leave us feeling dangerously tired, restless, struggling under its weight. I don't know what your burdens are. I know what mine are. But in thinking about this, I'm reminded about what St. Augustine wrote in his book, Confessions. For you, being God, have made us so that we long for you, and our heart is restless until it rests in you. We can try all sort of things to fill the restlessness, find some sort of cure for the tiredness, if that's binge watching Netflix or doom scrolling through social media, going out and finding social interaction, or withdrawing and isolating. We have all these ways that we try and cope. All these ways that we try to fix what's going on. And don't get me wrong, there are many very good and healthy ways to cope, to care for our well-being, to care for our needs. But as Augustine reminds us, when we put ourselves in God's hands, we find a rest and a peace that can be found nowhere else. It's not always easy, though. It's one thing to sit and hear about finding rest in God. It can be a totally different thing to actually feel that, or to feel like you're going anywhere in that direction. We can know something in our heads. We can acknowledge something to be true. But sometimes the rest of us needs a bit of time to catch up to that. So we have this continual reminders, like this passage today, to help us, like what Augustine reminds us of. Here's what is true. We also have it in things like our liturgy, some of the communion liturgy that we use sometime here in this church. The invitation to the table of, come to me not because you are strong, but because you are weak. Come not because of any goodness of your own, but because you need mercy and help. All these things we have here to continually remind us about the truth. And so today, what I would love to remind you of is this invitation and a promise. An invitation to keep coming to Jesus, to keep taking up his yoke and learning from him, because he cares for us, for what is truly good for us. And there's also a promise that in our weakness, in our weariness and tiredness, our souls will find their rest in absolutely everything they would ever need.